My name is Daniella, and you are listening to The Audacious Path, the one and only podcast that is specifically aimed at adventure creators just like you and me. Every 2 weeks, I interview other creators in the adventure sphere, and I ask them about how they started their adventure creator business. I'm super excited about today's episode because I get to talk with one of my role models within the YouTube adventure space, Maya from Sailing Magic Carpet. Maya is an absolute legend because of her amazing storytelling that completely enwraps you in the story and makes you just feel like you're present and you're there and you feel so many emotions.
The storytelling part is probably the part that came the most naturally to me, more so than the sailing and the part, if I'm being totally honest.
In this episode, she talks about all of those storytelling elements and how she uses things like sound and music and storyboarding to create such a captivating story.
Yeah, it's not necessarily very interesting to watch, and it might be more true to reality, just a person alone on their boat talking to a camera. That is often the actual reality. But there needs to be a little more attention paid to the actual story that you're imparting.
But she also talks about the other side, how she had to learn to run a business and how she had to make choices about story versus making sure she was making money.
I don't necessarily ascribe to the whole creativity above all and just follow your true self 100% either, because the absolute reality is that you do at some point need to be able to support yourself.
You can find Maya on YouTube and Instagram at Sailing Magic Carpet, and I would love to hear what you think of this episode as you listen along. You can tag me or send me a DM at The Audacious Path, and I hope you enjoy this episode. So can you start out by sharing a bit about yourself and how you embarked on your journey as a creator during Sailing Magic Carpet?
Yeah, well, I had this sort of idea of sailing around the world since I was about 13. My parents have both sailed around the world on board tall ships, so I came by the idea that this is something you could do pretty honestly, but I never went sailing with them. After they did that around the world voyage, they bought a house in Canada and they raised my brother and I, and kind of never sailed again, really. But then when I was in university, I came across this boat that was at the dock, and long story short, it was sort of neglected by its owners, and they ended up giving it to me for $1. So that was sort of this life-changing moment where that dream became a bit more reality. But even then, it was still a long journey ahead. I lived on that boat, I fixed it up, but I honestly didn't do that much sailing on it. I was still figuring things out and was very unsure.
Feel that.
Yes. But later on, I got a job on a boat in the Mediterranean. I ended up meeting my husband, and now we're sailing together and we have this channel. So this channel really started after I met my husband and we had already started sailing together.
I remember watching that story. I think you did like a special episode on that that we had seen.
On my boat, yeah, totally. I did sort of that was after it had already happened and the boat had already been sold, but I did a little 4-part series on it, yeah.
So how did you understand, what was the process of understanding that this was so captivating for you? Because obviously, something you can feel your passion in your videos. So what was that like to leading to being a storyteller and becoming a filmmaker?
Well, the storytelling part is probably the part that came the most naturally to me, more so than the sailing and the part, if I'm being totally honest. I've always just loved to read. I've loved to write. I did kind of study journalism in school. I say kind of because I went to a liberal arts university, so it was a little bit more of a broad education, but I focused in on journalism. And I just loved telling stories. So when I started the videos, it wasn't necessarily with the intention to create this whole business and this whole sort of online thing going on that we now have. It was really more an outlet, because the one challenge that I was having at the start of our sailing journey is I had met Aladino, my now husband. I fell in love with him. I fell in love with the boat. I still do, Europe. So there was all these really exciting things, but it did mean that in order to pursue this new life with him in the boat, I had to leave my old life completely behind in Canada, my friends and my boat and my family. And so as exciting as that time in life was, there was also an awful lot of adjustment and kind of loss and trying to figure out this very brand new normal. And the videos to me were actually a way to have an outlet for a lot of the things that I loved. It gave me an outlet to write, which has always brought me solace. It gave me an outlet for my music, which is something that I love to do. And it was also, most importantly, a way to sort of still be able to connect with friends and family at home, show them what I'm actually doing. So that was the initial purpose of the videos. It was sort of like a balm for my soul after, moving a very long way away from home.
I feel that. It resonates with me being an American living in New Zealand. That totally resonates with me. And it's interesting because I've interviewed quite a few big creators at this point, and it seems to be kind of a similar story of like people it was like an outlet or it was a way of like showing family, but it wasn't to make money. And I almost find myself wondering if that's an important element of being able to fully embrace your creativity, because I came to it where I was trying to make money off of it. And therefore I was trying to follow all these trends and doing all these, just things that you do when you're trying to start a business. And it wasn't until I feel I really embraced just being myself and just being creative that it really started to take off. Does that resonate with you at all?
It does resonate with me, but I also want to be like careful about how I talk about it, because I don't necessarily ascribe to the whole like, oh, creativity above all and like just follow your true self 100% either, because the absolute reality is that you do at some point need to be able to support yourself. So there's a balance to strike. When I started out, I think what was working is that we already had another plan to make money. Like we were only doing a short sailing season, then we were going back to Switzerland to make money. So we didn't have a lot of money, but we also had a plan for where it was coming from. So I think that was really, really helpful. But I mean, if you are going to start an online business or channel of any kind, to put a lot into it, it does become a really full-time job. And if it becomes a full-time job, then there needs to be a financial element involved, or you just will have absolutely no money and you can't live like that. It is really important to follow your passion, but also to have some amount of like, okay, where is my money coming from? And being a little bit practical about it as well.
It almost seems like where your starting place is depends on what you need to learn, because I started much more on the business side, so I needed to learn to be creative, but you started much more on the creative side and need to learn to have the business side. So
that's a really good way to put it.
You got to think about where you're coming from in the first place. Do you have any specific places where you've gotten your inspiration, like other filmmakers or other YouTubers or something like that?
I really like Eva Zubek's videos. I think she does a really good job. Yeah, you like her too.
I love her. I'm trying to interview her actually. We're chatting right now, so.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Yeah, I love her videos. I love how she's really good at incorporating other people into her videos too, which is a really big skill that I want to get better at. And it seems like she just has this sense of like the classic documentary style that she's really modernized into a format that works for modern day YouTube as well. So I like how she makes her videos. I like watching Isabel Page's videos. They're just beautifully shot. They're a little bit in a different style than what I make, but the cinematography is incredible. Do you know her videos? Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I know her as well.
Yeah, she makes beautiful content. But I also just got a lot of inspiration, honestly, from like books and music and like other art forms, because the magic thing about video is that it is kind of all art forms combined in a way. Like there's this really strong visual component, obviously. There's a really strong auditory component. There is the storytelling component, which can be even more like directly linked to writing through like an actual narrative, like a narration that you read over the episode. There's just kind of everything in it. So it's gives an opportunity to really dive into whatever you're interested in and bring it to life through video.
Do you do any collaborations? I know you're talking about trying to work with other people and incorporate people. Have you done any collaborations as well with your channel?
Yes. I mean, so what we've done mostly is like interviews with other sailors or people related to the boat world, and then I'll turn those into small documentaries. So that has been really fun and really rewarding. We actually have one coming out very soon with Kirsten Neuschafer, which is super exciting. Yeah, Kirsten is, I mean, phenomenal. Holy crap. I mean, she basically needs no introduction, but I mean, if anyone's listening who doesn't know, she's just won an around the world single-handed solo nonstop race, became the first woman to do so, broke a whole bunch of fleet records along the way, and is just like the most kind and humble person. So that's sort of how I like to collaborate, is I like to talk to people and make videos about them. We did it with some friends of ours in the States, Matt and Yanni. They were just starting out on their YouTube channel, and they were refitting a boat, and I made a little documentary about them, which was also really fun. So yeah, in that way we collaborate.
How do you structure your videos? Do you have a clear beginning, middle, and end? Have you, obviously you said that storytelling is something that came quite naturally to you. Did you do any kind of studying about storytelling or like story arcs or different storytelling structures?
Yeah, so I mean, I did do a lot of writing in university, not necessarily like narrative writing, I guess. A lot of it was more like journalism, but there is absolutely parallels to be drawn. In terms of how I structure the videos, there's the ideal and then there's the actual. So some of the videos follow the ideal, but also the reality is like I publish a video every single Friday, and that's sort of the pressure of keeping up with something like this. So they're not all ideal, but I do always try to have a beginning, middle, and end. I try to structure it so that there's some sort of enticing thing to look forward to in the episode, and that you know why you're continuing to watch. I think that's one thing that's really important. You know what you're working towards, and you know what could be coming next in the video. I think that is probably the biggest thing with YouTube, because YouTube, especially, like, there's so much available. There's a million things vying for your attention all at once. And so to keep somebody focused on your video, I think having some sort of like through line is pretty much essential. In terms of how I actually go about doing that, I always write a script before I start actually making the video.
That was my next question.
Or the script comes after filming, I guess I should say. So I have all the footage and then I make the script, because it's obviously not a scripted show. What we're doing is actually what's happening. So I can't really write the script beforehand, or it would just feel super forced. So I film and then I write the script to sort of weave narration and everything into the video in a way that makes sense. And then I can sort of get a better idea of like, okay, where's the beginning, the middle, and the end? And I can sort of force a little bit more meaning in there with the narration or whatever else.
What's your time allocation to each step of the process?
To edit a video, like the full, like from script to final product, usually takes me a day or two. Like a full day of very concentrated effort, or 2 days of like a little bit more of a relaxed pace. But then that doesn't include the filming, because that's hard to tease out, because the filming sort of just happens like as part of our life. So it's hard to actually say how much time I spend on the filming.
That's very interesting. I definitely thought it would be more than that. You produce pretty high quality videos for that. That's amazing. And I'm jealous.
Well, and I've been doing it for 5 years now. So I've definitely like developed a process. Like it's much more streamlined than it used to be, for sure.
What is your approach to maintaining authenticity in your videos while also like making sure that your narrative is captivating and is a story that people will actually want to watch? Because I've found that like not everything like is actually interesting, and people say they want to see the real story, but that's not actually what the stats show.
That's a difficult question. I mean, I think one thing is to always keep in mind that what you're trying to produce is actually a video, rather than just like, I mean, some people will just put vlogs of themselves saying whatever and edit different clips of that together and call it a video, but I don't think those are ever the videos that really gain a lot of traction. So you can make the mundane very interesting if you craft it into something that seems well curated, with really nice cinematography and good music, and maybe even like a little narrative piece about how this is the mundane and it's a part of life, and that's, you know, the reality of things, and you can write that into something beautiful and perhaps has some meaning for somebody. So I think life can be made really interesting with the right sort of artistic tools applied to it, even if it's not actually interesting in the moment. I will say that the one thing is that sometimes I watch my old videos back and I'll watch a video about some time where I remember being really like frustrated or bored or depressed or just like not having a good time. And I'll watch the video back, and because there's all these like little artistic elements in it and the music, and it turns it into this whole story, I'm like, oh wow, what a great time. Like, but in reality, it really was difficult and frustrating. So that's the other downside of it, is like you can say that something is difficult and frustrating and have tense music behind it, but it never really, I think, grasps the actual reality of what it's like to live through those moments.
I mean, it's such a tough one, because I think I'm a big part of like a YouTube creator group on Facebook, and you'll get a lot of people who come in and be like, I'm showing like the real boat life, and they never grow, and they're complaining about not growing. And for me, I think one of the realities that kind of hit me was that like YouTube is an entertainment platform.
Yeah.
Like, people come there to be entertained. They're either trying to escape their day, or they're trying to be inspired or something like that. Unless you're doing like how-to videos, which I guess you guys are kind of leaning towards a little bit more now, but
Totally.
They're still much more of a story than they are of a how-to, it feels.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, and I don't want to sound harsh, but like the real boat life doesn't have to be portrayed in a boring way. And I think that's very often what you end up getting with people who are like, I'm showing the real boat life. They're just sort of talking into a camera and uploading it with very little else. And that, yeah, it's not necessarily very interesting to watch, and it might be more true to reality, just a person alone on their boat talking to a camera. That is often the actual reality. But there needs to be a little more attention paid to the actual story that you're imparting, or it's not going to really capture anyone.
If you're enjoying this podcast episode, then I also recommend that you sign up for my newsletter, where every 2 weeks I share research-backed advice on how to start, grow, and monetize your adventure channel. My newsletter includes tips on how to design your channel, how to build a brand, how to storyboard, how to film, how to edit, and much, much more. And I'd hope that you will take the leap and you will join the fast-growing list of creators that are making their adventure lifestyle sustainable. Okay, so how do you think about the various storytelling elements? What are they to you, and how did you go out learning them?
To be honest, it does change a little bit depending on what kind of video I'm trying to make. So like if I'm making a video about sailing, it's going to be a little different than if I'm making the refit videos, which are, a very different medium. And we do a lot of both. So it's a hard question, because a lot of it does sort of come down to feeling as well. But I did read a lot about storytelling and thinking about, there's the typical 3-act sort of thing where you've set things up, and then you create a conflict, and then you resolve that conflict. So always having some sort of conflict in the story will definitely help as something to overcome. Positioning yourself as the character and making sure, and this is something that I think can often be overlooked in vlogs, making sure that you get the reactions of you, the character, to whatever is actually happening. And not just sort of after the fact speaking into the camera like, this just happened and it was frustrating or it was difficult or whatever, but like really trying to capture facial expressions and trying to capture even just wordless moments where you're just sort of sitting and you're looking at the thing that has just happened, and everyone who's watching knows exactly what you're feeling inside at that moment.
To clarify, I was actually referring to like music and background noise and composition like that. Although this is very good information too, so feel free to carry on. But that was more where my brain was going.
Oh yeah, stuff like that. I mean, the background music, there's all sorts of royalty-free sites now, and I actually find Epidemic Sound to be a really good one, because it really does a good job at grouping music in terms of mood. And like, that's all I'm ever after. Like, I am editing, I want a specific mood, and so I'll go to Epidemic Sound and I'll try and find, not sponsored by the way, but I'll try and find music for that mood. When it comes to actually learning the ropes of editing, I mean, I just spent hours on YouTube. There isn't really a shortcut. I spent so long figuring out all the different editing techniques that are available to me on my chosen editing program. I mean, I use Final Cut, but you can use whatever. Writing the narration, I developed that process myself just because I think I was a writer first and foremost. So writing to me seemed to make the most sense as a starting point. But I know a lot of people will just drag all the footage into a timeline and then sort of edit it down from there in a more linear way. So they've got everything already in order, and then they'll like add little sections or remove little sections. So there's a lot of different ways you can edit. Watching different people edit on YouTube, there's a lot of videos where you can just watch people edit, and that was super helpful to see how different people go about it, and then just choosing what worked best for me.
What about sound? Do you use sound effects? I saw
Oh
this.
yeah.
There's a silent hiker that he doesn't say anything through the whole episode, and he just like all he does is does sound effects as he's turning on boilers and stuff like that. And it kind of inspired me. I was like, oh, I wonder if Maya like thinks about things like this.
Oh yeah, I totally use a lot of sound effects. Less so right now in the refit, but when we are sailing and I'm telling like more of a narrative story, yeah, sound is huge, because very often when you're sailing, like the actual sound of the wind and the waves can be a bit blown out or not perfect. So I will
Mm.
almost always add like sound effects of the ocean, sound effects of the boat. That's huge. Super, super important.
Yeah, helps people get into the moment. I
Yeah.
want to jump back to music a little bit because one of the things that strikes me about your episodes, especially the ones where you were sailing, and I watched you guys early on, so like I'm like thinking of that one episode, like I told you about the journaling one, where like the music really does bring you in, and of course like the different shots you're choosing as well. When you're choosing all of these things, are you thinking about the story or are you thinking about the emotion or what is like what's going on as you're making those choices about which to use and sound effects and all of that?
Yeah, I think I'm mostly thinking about the emotion, but that's very closely tied to the story, right? It's a moment of
Mm.
happiness or a moment of sadness or whatever in the story. So that's what drives me. And then along with emotion, different genres might fit different emotions really differently. And so you can look into that as well. So for like a happier moment, I'll often try to find something like folksy, a little bit more acoustic, a little bit more upbeat with some sort of maybe driving guitar. If I'm editing together like a sequence of like really hard work, for example, like when we're doing the refit videos and I've got a big montage of Aladino hammering things and pulling things apart or whatever, then I'll go for something sort of like bluesy, like rock slash blues. I find that really sort of suits that sort of like grr, man, ripping things apart sort of thing. If I'm after if I'm after like a really cinematic moment, then I'll actually look for film music, which is a whole other genre as well, with sort of like soaring orchestras and synths. So within the mood, I think you can also really choose a genre that works really well, like quiet scenes in the evening where the boat is just quietly sitting at anchor and there's a moon above, then like some soft jazz is really gonna feel nice there. But that's just that it's also personal preference and feeling. So like what I think are genres that fit a mood might not work for everyone, and that's sort of the fun of it too. There's absolutely no objective truth here. It's just whatever feels right to you.
Yeah, that's true. And I have a question to follow up on that. So I had a sailing channel. It was purely sailing channel and had your typical audience of 55 plus. And I've just started a brand new channel that's focused on just adventure overall. So I'm talking to sailing people, I'm talking to adventurers, and I'm also doing vlogs on the side. And it's been interesting because my audience has changed to being between 25 and 45, and I almost have no old people at all. And as a result, I've kind of shifted how I do some of my editing. Like I was doing things slower with my older audience, and now I'm doing a slightly faster pace. When you're making these choices around like music and how you do your cuts and everything like that, how much are you thinking of your audience?
Yeah, I am thinking of them. And you're absolutely right. The sailing audience in general, it is 55 plus, and it's almost exclusively male. And the difficulty with that is that that's very much not the demographic I'm in any way. So there does need to be a little attention paid. But fortunately, I think a lot of my natural tastes do seem to resonate with our audience anyway. Like, I actually really love jazz and blues and like stuff like that. So that's not really a stretch. On the other hand, like, I also really love listening to hip hop sometimes. And I remember I included a hip hop track once and my audience just freaked out. And I was like, okay, calm down, guys.
Oh, that's
So
sad.
like I probably won't do that again, but I do know that there's a lot of, I mean, for every audience there's, you know, things that they'll like and things they won't like. The really big benefit of having the older audience is that there's a bit more attention span, and there's a little bit more willingness to watch a longer form piece. So
Yeah.
I really like that because I like moving slowly through the story that I'm telling if I'm able to. And again, slowly, not in a way that's boring, because I do think those can be two different things. Like it can be captivating, but a slow burn, like a novel versus like a shorter comic, for instance. But that doesn't mean that the novel can sort of just drag on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So I appreciate having an older audience for that aspect, but yeah, I mean, it's important to keep it in mind for sure. And if I was catering to a younger audience, I would definitely make some changes to how I edit. I'd change up the music, probably, definitely change up the pace of things. And I think I would change up maybe some of the like seriousness sometimes. Like I know that I can tend to really pontificate on and on about something. And maybe for a younger audience, I would cut that down a little. I don't know. But it's also just
Mm.
about a bit of experience getting to know what your audience likes. Like I really thought that they would trust me enough to be like, oh, this hip hop song is actually a really good one, but no.
How do you think about pacing? One of the things I've been getting into a lot lately is understanding that like you do have to like switch up the scenes enough in order to keep people engaged. Because if it's this too much similar for too long, people kind of get bored. And I
Yeah.
can see that in my analytics. Do you think about stuff like that?
Yes, it's really hard now that we're doing the refit. There's really only so much I can film from so many different angles.
Mm.
No, but I do think about it. For instance, if we do have a time lapse or something like that that's dragging on a little long, then I'll do little things like the Ken Burns effect, like zooming slowly in on it just to sort of draw the viewer in and sort of make it seem like the scene's a bit more dynamic. Shots talking to camera, I always try to illustrate what is actually being talked about with B-roll. I think that's really important, so it's not just a talking head for eons. Really trying to, and I'll do that consciously while filming too. Like if I'm filming myself or Aladino describes something, after we're done speaking, I'll go and try to film whatever it is we were describing
Yeah, absolutely.
right away. That's important. Yeah, trying to break up the scene. And I mean, watching it back yourself as well and just thinking, like, is this something I would actually be interested in watching? And very often, if you're actually honest with yourself about that, then I think you can
I
come
love
to a
my
really good
videos.
conclusion.
How do you sustain your creativity over time, and make sure you're maintaining like a steady flow of creative ideas? It must be so much harder for you now because I imagine at least that when you were sailing, all the time it was very inspiring. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is really inspiring now. But how do you keep those creative blocks from not blocking you?
If I'm going to be completely honest, the refit has been extraordinarily difficult for me. It's really not my expertise and it's not what brings me joy. And I really struggle to find creativity in that. And if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't able to deal with it extremely well. Like my stock answer is to always read and write, read and consume things which inspire you. Watch films, listen to music, read a poem, whatever. And that will very often reset me. But during the refit, I really just felt like I had no time for that. And when I was finished work for the day, I was so drained. I just like couldn't intake anything. So what I did is I did really actually change up the style of the videos during the refit. And instead of sort of the narrative style that I always made during sailing, I switched to a little bit more of a documentary style where instead of writing a narration that I would perform, I wrote an interview that I would give to Aladino, and I would basically interview him on camera and therefore sort of get him to do the narration. And that turned it into a much more documentary style film, which I think for the refit works well because it is much more like a nuts and bolts, like this is how we're doing things and these are the decisions we're making sort of story. There is obviously the emotional element in there as well, but to be honest, like the truth of my emotional elements during that refit were not great. Like it's been a tough chapter. It's not necessarily a chapter I think I would maybe choose again, but we're in it now, so we got to get out of it.
No, I get that.
Mhm.
Something similar happened on my channel, and I ended up having to film something that was just awful, to be honest.
Oh
So I
no.
totally resonates with me.
Yeah.
How So one of the things that I do, so as I've gotten more into like, there were no resources, like I said before, there were no resources for people in our space. And I just started deep diving into like analyzing and studying channels nonstop. And at the moment, I'm actually creating a course because I'm like, oh my God, I've learned so much.
Oh, that's so
But one of
cool.
the things that I noticed is that if the subscribers versus the views on a video, if that's high, that shows that people are who are your subscribers are still coming back. And I thought it was really impressive that you guys have gone to do a refit and your style, I noticed, has completely changed. And you said it's changed, and yet you retained like a really good ratio. Like, how did you go about changing to that kind of videos? How did you make sure you kept your audience engaged and like that they were still there for you?
I mean, not everyone feels that way. You know, there's definitely some people who are only there for the sailing, some for the refit. But I do think in general, like the sailing community is a really DIY, hands-on one. So I think people who are interested in sailing very often are interested in elements of a refit as well. So it wasn't too hard of a transition to make. And actually, if I'm being honest, I think the refit videos almost perform better because I think it's maybe a little bit
Mm.
of a less saturated market. There's less people doing something as insane as this. um, and there's also, I think, an element of like it gives the viewers a sense that they're learning something in pursuit of their own dreams rather than just watching somebody else live out perhaps their dream. So that hasn't been too difficult of a transition, if I'm being honest. Now, what is a more difficult transition is, for example, like once we did a road trip to go pick up a water maker. So it was still boat related, kind of, but like we were living in a car on the road for that episode. And that one did not perform as well because I think it's just outside of the boat niche. So if you step too far out, I think it's going to be a challenge to keep your same subscribers, even if you
Mhm.
have the same storytelling style. But
Yeah, I feel that. I had to start a
Mhm.
whole new channel. So, best thing I ever
Yeah,
did.
yeah. I mean, totally. And that's something I have in mind too. Like in the future, if I ever want to do something else, then I think it would be starting a new channel. And whoever wants to can follow me there. But you do get niched in on YouTube for sure. You do.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't hurt, or I'm definitely it helps that Aladino is so like he's precise. Like
Yeah.
that's what stands out to me about he's so precise, and I think that that part of the boat building is very unique. Like boat building might not be so unique, but his precision is what I got me into it. You know, I can't even find the words.
Oh, Aladino is a huge part of why the refit videos are so successful. I mean, without him, there wouldn't be refit videos. He's such a talented boat builder, and he really, really knows what he's doing. And so people really like value what he has to say and want to tune in and hear what he has to say. So yeah, I mean, without Aladino, the refit videos would be a very different thing indeed. In fact, they would not exist because I would not be doing a refit like this.
Mhm. Fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But y'all
yeah.
have a beautiful boat, so yeah. I want to bounce back to hold on one second, sustaining your creativity. I want to talk a bit more about do you have any kind of like habits or things you do to like get yourself creative?
Generally, when I'm feeling in a slump, I will just turn to books, music, like I mentioned before. Like, that's really the only thing that I found will actually take me out of it. Watching some inspiring short films or something like that. Yeah, basically just consuming things that other people have created. It gets me excited about it again and it gets new ideas flowing. I don't really have any other answers. And to answer if I have any like, uh, routines or anything. I mean, my life is totally routineless. I mean,
Mm.
there's some things I'm able to control. Like every morning, I generally try to have coffee, but like every day is really different when you're on the boat and even in the refit. So I don't have that much of an actual practice. I try to write in a journal every day, get some ideas onto paper. I find that can often kickstart things, but no, just consume good art, consume the kind of art that you want to create. That is the most important thing, hands down.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I was living on a boat full time when something happened. I ended up having an emergency sell the boat, and I now live in an apartment, and like I have a very
Mm.
much of a fixed routine. And I get out and sail all the time. I do yacht deliveries now, which is my way of like keeping on the
Oh,
ocean.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I get paid for it now. I'm like, yes.
Amazing. Hey, congrats.
Uh, you got to make it work, you know? But what I
Totally.
found was really interesting is my creativity has flourished since getting off the boat because unlike you guys, I did not have any skills. I was learning, well, I guess you were kind of learning some stuff from scratch, but like that
Mhm.
intense learning process of not only sailing, but also how to fix the boat, how to do storytelling, how to do YouTube. Like it was just so much. And I felt like my creativity was stymied, but now I've got this routine going and I just find like I'm just like creative all the freaking time. So is it possible that like the routine part is a big part of affecting your creativity?
I do think it is. I think a routine can be very helpful, but it's not entirely necessary because I do manage to keep up with my creativity, even without a routine. But like, for instance, I mean, when we're sailing and the boats, like when we're actually physically sailing and the boat's moving, like I can't be sort of thinking too much about some esoteric idea that's swimming around in my head. Typically, I am a little bit more focused on sailing. So the creativity part really comes more with the boat lifestyle rather than I think the actual sailing, in the evening on anchor in the cockpit. And that's when sort of my ideas start to come around. But no, I totally relate to that. I mean, the actual like part of sailing a boat is very demanding and it doesn't leave a lot of
Mm.
room for just letting your brain float away into the clouds.
All right, I'm so sorry. I've got to run. I'm actually starting salsa lessons tonight, so there you go.
Oh my gosh, fun.
I know.
Amazing.
You, I'm so excited. Do you have
Cool.
anything else to offer, like other people like us that are trying to start a YouTube channel? It's so freaking intimidating, but obviously you've mastered it. Any last tips?
Well, I definitely haven't mastered it. So much to learn always, but that's
Yes,
kind of the
that's
exciting
cool.
part. It's like such a long journey. I would just say produce things that interest you, that excite you. Watch things that interest you and excite you, and always try to keep in mind like there are actually easier ways to earn money. So unless you enjoy this, then it's probably not the thing for you. So really come at it from a place of
Agreed.
love and
Yeah.
create something you're proud of.
Yeah. And it also sounds like, I mean, you just even mentioned like there's so much to learn. That constant learning really needs to be a part of the game too.
Yeah, or it gets boring. You know, the times I have found myself in a rut with the channel, it's almost always solved by learning a new skill and pulling my videos in a different direction. Because as soon as you start to just do the same thing over and over, yeah, it gets boring, like with anything.
All right. Thank you. I'm so sorry I have to run. I would love
No,
to ask
not
you
at
so
all.
many questions.
Thank you so much. This was such a joy. I honestly, I love, love, love talking about the creative side of things. It brings such
Yes.
joy to my heart. So thank you for reaching out because it's really such a nice opportunity for me.
Thank you so much for having a listen. I hope you got something out of this and you found it useful. This podcast isn't free to produce and it does take a lot of time. So if you would like to say thank you anyway, please leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. It really does help this little show grow and I genuinely appreciate it. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.